Okay, let's dive in. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're really unpacking Gareth Knight's book, Magical Images, and we're zeroing in specifically on chapter 3. It's the one called Landscapes and Journeys. Think of this deep dive as, well, your guide to understanding how visualizing these journeys isn't just, pleasant daydreaming. It's presented here as a really potent technique for inner work.
That's right. And as we've sort of touched on before with this text, Knight's idea of magic,
Hmm.
it's not about stage tricks or Hollywood spells, is it? It's framed much more as a kind of rigorous mental discipline, spiritual too,
Yeah.
all designed really to help you access and realize your own potential.
Exactly. And the core tool, as he calls it, is the magical image. We talked before about how imagination isn't just one thing, right? There are levels. You've got everyday fancy, maybe conjuring silly ideas. Then primary imagination, helping structure reality. And then the secondary imagination.
Uh-huh. And it's that secondary imagination the source really highlights. That's the key, supposedly, to accessing these deeper layers of reality. It's the part of us that engages with archetypes, with symbols from, well, let's call them inner dimensions. And if you cultivate it, the idea is it becomes a genuine way of perceiving things. You develop an inner eye, an inner ear. You can start to tune into these hidden inner worlds, perfectly natural, just usually hidden.
Right, and these magical images, the source explains, they aren't just random flashes, they form systems, interconnected ones, almost like nested Russian dolls or Chinese boxes, as the text says. You might start with a big picture, like a cosmic map,
Yeah, the big framework.
which then holds landscapes and journeys, and those might lead you to temples or shrines. And inside those, you could encounter guardians, guides, that sort of thing. It's structured.
Totally. And picking up where chapter 2 left off, we saw how these cosmic charts or maps, think of the old crystalline spheres model, or maybe the tree of life, which is used a lot. They give you that initial structure. They're like frameworks for understanding how different images connect and, importantly, where you fit into that larger picture of potential.
Okay, so chapter 2 gave us the map, the big overview, the structure. So this deep dive, looking at chapter 3, this is about actually stepping onto the map, moving into the territory itself. We're talking landscapes and journeys.
Exactly. And what's really insightful in this chapter, I think, is how the source sees that cosmic map not just as a diagram you study. It's presented as a literal ground plan for action. It's the blueprint for setting out on what Knight calls an initiatory journey.
An initiatory journey. Okay, that sounds pretty significant. What does that actually mean here?
Well, it means a purposeful trip, basically. A journey through what the text calls ordered states of consciousness. So you're actively using the structure from the map to navigate specific inner places in a meaningful order, not just, wandering aimlessly in your imagination.
Right, so it's not just a casual stroll in your head. These are specific paths through inner landscapes. A bit like the quests and storylines you find in, well, pretty much all myths and legends, aren't they?
Precisely. Like, think of Dante's journey in the Divine Comedy Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. He's literally using the cosmology of his time as a map for his inner experience. Or, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, or Apuleius's Golden Ass, even the Arthurian quest for the Grail. They're all powerful examples of these journeys through symbolic lands that reflect inner change.
And obviously reading those big epics is great for inspiration, but the source seems to draw a line here for practical work. For actively tuning your consciousness, you need something more focused.
Yes, exactly. You need specific selections. And that brings us right to the main practical technique in Chapter 3. Using these imaginary journeys as a, what's the phrase, composition of mood or composition of place.
Composition of mood, composition of place. That wording itself is quite interesting. How does that work? How does just imagining a place actually affect your mood, according to Knight?
It's quite neat, actually. The source explains it like this. The specific images of the place you imagine, they're used deliberately to induce the mood that goes with them. It's a way to sort of pre-tune your consciousness, get yourself onto the right inner wavelength before you go deeper. And then this is crucial. The mood you build up actually feeds back. It helps shape and bring forth more spontaneous imagery that fits that mood as you continue.
Ah, I see. So it's like a loop. You use the landscape to set the inner feeling, and that feeling then influences what happens next within that landscape. It's dynamic. And the source gives a specific example, right? The path to the tower.
Yes, it does. It's laid out as a short, focused journey, designed to cover quite a few different aspects without being overwhelming. The aim is to lead you from the temple of our own being, basically, your current inner self outward into what it calls an inner objective world, a symbolic landscape that has its own reality, separate from just your mood of the moment.
Okay. And it starts quite grounded, doesn't it? Connecting back to earlier stuff in the book. You start seated, calm breathing, building up that sense of light in your aura.
Right, you establish that inner presence first. Then you visualize standing on an earth disk. The source describes it very specifically. Quartered in traditional colors, citrine, olive, russet, black, which, in these esoteric systems, often link to elements or directions. So you're grounding yourself symbolically.
In the material world, represented that way.
Exactly. Then as you stand there, this disk dissolves, and suddenly you find yourself on a hilltop, open countryside. It's a clear shift from that initial symbolic grounding to a more narrative inner landscape.
Yeah, a scene change.
And this new scene is brought alive with senses. You're meant to feel a light breeze, the sun's warmth, hear birdsong, maybe smell flowers. The source really emphasizes making it multi-sensory. It's not just looking at a picture. It's being in a living place.
And from this hill, you spot the path. It's described as, what, a rough track, chalky surface, rutted.
Deeply rutted, yeah. From centuries of use. You get the sense of history, of pilgrims having walked there.
And it's not just any old path. The source names it a trackway across the land of Logres, which immediately brings up King Arthur, Merlin, the Grail, all that legendary stuff.
Right. It layers the image of the path with this really rich, mythic resonance. Questing, spiritual seeking. You're not just on a path. You're on the ancient pilgrimage way, symbolically.
And you start walking it, maybe feeling like others are walking with you, unseen companions, heading towards the holiest earth in Logres, it says, towards Glastonbury.
Which is presented as this major convergence point. Loads of sacred traditions, history, mystery, all layered there.
The journey goes on, over hills. Weary All Hill is mentioned like a sleeping beast.
Yeah, evocative language. And you pause by the holy thorn tree there, connecting to the Joseph of Arimathea legend. Roots of sacred history.
And then you see the final view. Across a valley, maybe glimpses of old buildings, huts. You see two hills. Chalice Hill, described as round, green, with a well at the bottom.
Often linked to feminine energy, healing, that kind of symbolism.
And right next to it, Glastonbury Tor. Very distinctive shape.
Pyramid-like, the source says, with a spiral path going up, leading to that single lone tower at the very top. That iconic image is the goal of this particular journey segment.
Okay. So that whole sequence, Earth Disk, Hilltop, Logres Path, arriving at Glastonbury, seeing the Tor and Tower, that's the example of the short composition of mood or place.
Precisely. And the function is to tune your consciousness, get you onto the specific inner wavelength associated with that landscape, with pilgrimage, quest to ancient sites. It's about building that particular atmosphere inside yourself.
Right, makes sense. You use the detailed imagery to create a specific inner state. But let's talk about something practical that always comes up. Getting back. How do you leave the inner landscape? The source mentions people worry about getting stuck, right?
It does. And it's very reassuring about it. Basically, if you're approaching this centered and balanced, you are always in charge. You're directing your awareness, not getting lost.
So you're not going to get trapped there?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The source says you've got a few ways back. One is to consciously retrace your steps in your mind. Walk back down the path, back to the hill, maybe see the earth disk reform, then settle back into your body. Slowly or quickly, doesn't matter.
Or you can just decide to come back.
Exactly. Just affirm your intention, your will, to return fully to physical awareness and to really reinforce that grounding, that boundary between inner and outer worlds. The source suggests simple physical actions.
Like stamping your foot, clapping hands.
Yeah, things like that. Or even a symbolic gesture, like imagining drawing curtains closed on the inner scene. Or just having a warm drink, a bite to eat. Simple things. They act as conscious anchors, telling your mind and body, okay, inner work done for now, fully back in the physical.
It's like deliberately switching off the mental radio after listening to a particular station. That feels much more manageable.
Yeah, demystifies it. It's about active direction, not passive drifting.
It is. And the source is clear. For most people, these simple methods are perfectly fine. No need for anything super elaborate.
So what about choosing the landscapes? Does it have to be a real place like Glastonbury? Can it be anywhere?
That's a good question. Using places you've actually visited can help. The source notes it makes the visualization sharper, obviously, because you have memories. And it might create what's called an etheric link, a kind of subtle connection to the place's energy.
So visiting a place gives you the raw material for your inner work.
Yeah, something like that. But, and this is important, the source also says that doing the actual imaginative work in a quiet space at home can often be more effective than trying to do it at the physical site, which might be busy or distracting.
You get the impression out in the world, but you process it deeply in your own controlled inner space.
That makes a lot of sense. Capture the essence, then work with it without the noise, and you don't even have to be totally accurate geographically.
Not at all. It actually encourages taking liberties, adapting details, even improving on nature if it serves the inner landscape's symbolic power better. Like the example given, connecting the feeling or resonance of a real ancient track, like the Ridgeway, directly to Glastonbury in your mind, even if they don't physically connect.
So it's about the symbolic energy of ancient path, not drawing a perfect mental map of England.
Exactly. And crucially, the places can be totally made up, fictional. The main thing, the source says, is that they move us emotionally in however slight a way. That emotional connection is key. That's what primes the pump, gets the imagination going. And then with practice, the images themselves start to build up power and feed energy back to you.
Wow. That's quite something, the idea that these inner landscapes you work with gain their own kind of life, their own power through your attention. The source also hints about what happens next after reaching the tower in the example, going inside the tower.
Yeah. Chapter 3 mostly gets you to the place, but it definitely introduces the idea that the journey continues within the symbolic building you arrive at, moving from exploring landscapes to exploring interiors.
And later in the book, when it summarizes the structure, it connects that journey inside the tower back to the aura, back to the cosmic maps, doesn't it?
Right. This is where that phrase objective correlative really comes into play. The journey isn't just wandering through imaginary rooms. The source describes a tower journey, for instance, as a path into your own aura. The different levels or rooms inside, maybe a main hall, descending to cellars or crypts, going up higher, they're presented as objective correlatives.
Objective correlative, meaning an external symbol or image that directly matches up with an inner state or dynamic.
Exactly. So the different parts of the imagined tower correspond to different aspects or energy centers within you. Could relate to, say, the solar plexus, lower centers, the heart, the throat. Conceptually linking to the Sephiroth, or paths on the Tree of Life, which map out states of consciousness.
Ah, okay. So you're imaginatively walking up to your own energy field, your own psyche from the outside almost, and then exploring different parts of yourself by moving through the symbolic tower rooms. It gives you a structure.
Precisely. A narrative navigable structure for exploring what can feel like the very complex territory of your own consciousness, your subtle energies. And importantly, the source really stresses you need to address the lower dynamics you might encounter. It mentions cellar or crypt levels in the tower journey example.
Why is dealing with those lower aspects seen as so important in this system?
Well, the source is very direct about this. The spiritual path described here is absolutely not about escaping the physical world or ignoring the more primal parts of ourselves. It's about seeking deeper understanding and, crucially, conscious control of those parts and our connection to the material world.
So integration, not just flying off and leaving the foundation behind.
Exactly. The source warns that if you neglect those lower dynamics, you risk becoming kind of ineffectual, a purely subjective visionary, someone with maybe vivid inner experiences but no real grounding, no power to bring insights into the physical world meaningfully. A balanced path, in this view, means working with all of yourself, the roots as well as the branches.
So the journey isn't just about reaching the heights. Sometimes the most important work is in the depths within.
A truly integrated approach explores the whole spectrum. Deep roots in the earth, highest branches reaching for the stars,
Okay, so let's pull this together. What we've walked through from this source today. These landscapes, these imaginative journeys, like the path to the tower, they offer a really tangible, story-like way to explore inside yourself. They build on those cosmic map structures, giving us a method to actually walk within them.
Yeah, it's presented as very practical, a method for deliberately tuning your awareness to specific states or frequencies, for grounding yourself properly after doing inner work, and for actively integrating what you find inside with your everyday life and understanding.
It makes the abstract ideas of the inner world feel more relatable, something you can navigate, interact with, starting with that key emotional connection to the imagery.
And through that active engagement, the images themselves, as we said, gain life, gain power. It enriches the whole thing.
So here's something to think about. What does this mean for you, listening? The paths you choose to walk in your mind, the inner landscapes you explore, the symbolic places you build. According to this source, these aren't just throwaway thoughts. They might be just as real, maybe even more fundamentally real in how they shape your consciousness than the physical ground you're standing on. And, well, they're just waiting there for you to step onto them and start exploring.